Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. We took off last week. We took a little brief vacation, so we're coming back to you nice and rested, hopefully. As a reminder, when Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting this show, she's running the Massachusetts General Hospital telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting this show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist settings. We both consult with a number of traditional and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better, both for the clinician and for the patients. I made an initiative over the last week when Ami wasn't aware that I was going to do a better job of talking about the new and exciting things that Ami and I are doing. So Ami, you are incoming president at the American Heart Association. Is that
I am
right?
incoming board president at the Boston American Heart Association. So it starts at the beginning of next year, but it's exciting. They're doing some really good work. So I'm glad to be part of it.
Super congratulations for
Thank
that.
you.
That was a little bit of a surprise for me to learn that, Ami. Very excited about that. I'm giving the keynote at the Tufts Masters in Healthcare Informatics this week. So very excited about that, talking about the future of digital therapeutics, predictive analytics, and digital diagnostics, something that's near and dear to my heart. And also I chat with JMIR. I'm a JMIR ambassador. I have some great interviews that you should look for. Really nice interview with NIH. They have a study that just came out of virtual reality and using virtual reality to determine cognitive fatigue. And I read the paper, I was just like, oh my God, the last 2 years I've been cognitively fatigued.
Yep.
And now the NIH has a study that documents how to use a VR, virtual reality headset, and track that in patients. And I also just finished a WHO interview that looks at social listening. So there is a dashboard for social listening for different countries to see what different countries are asking, thinking, what questions they have, if they have concerns about COVID, the vaccine, and where they are. So very interesting.
That's fantastic. You know, the exciting part about that is you can actually track it with the Sustainable Development Goals as well and see how you're doing. So I think they're really going to get some good information from that. I think the one other new and exciting piece of news is the Consumer Electronics Show, which will be happening in January in Las Vegas, is going to have a digital health track again.
And is Ami leading one of those tracks?
I am leading it, and we are going to be talking about really addressing bias in AI, not the concepts and the theories, but what are we going to do as we use AI in healthcare to make things better as we move forward and design it the right way. So it's a really great lineup that we have, and we'll tell you more about it as we get closer. So a lot of exciting stuff coming up.
I'm looking forward to the CES. As a reminder, MedTech Insights is a live weekly interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview two guests. We have two great guest leaders in digital health today. Every Tuesday, except we took last Tuesday off at 12 noon Eastern time. We are live, we are recorded, so we do love and adore when you watch us and you type in. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, and you type into the comments box, we will bring that into the show, feature it on the bottom, and also feature any questions that you have for our audience. So feel free to go ahead, start chatting, typing in the comments, tell us who you are, where you're watching from, and what you're working on.
Wonderful. So today's show is going to be exciting and something a little bit different, a little bit more biotech oriented. Today we have Dr. Harith Rajagopalan. He's co-founder and CEO of Fractal. And we have Marc Elia, who is the founder of M28 Capital Management, investing in Fractal. So a great duo with us today. Let me give you a bio on Harith before we bring him on. He started the company while serving as an entrepreneur in residence at General Catalyst Partners. Prior to founding Fractal, Harith was an academic cardiologist and physician scientist. This is how I met him. He received his BS in chemistry from Stanford University, his MD PhD from Hopkins, and then there did some groundbreaking award-winning research on intestinal cancers. It was published in Nature and Science. And then after medical school, he trained internal medicine, clinical cardiology, and did a research fellowship at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute at Harvard Medical School. I think the most important and exciting part comes next when he took his passion for clinical medicine and science and decided to found Fractal. And so why don't we go ahead and bring him on and we'll learn about how and why. Harith, thank you for being with us. Great to have you.
Great to be with you, Jennifer and Ami. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start? I mean, I know you well, but I think our audience would love to hear a little bit about your story, because you are in clinical medicine, as many of our audience members are. And as many, there's so many things that we see where we think that perhaps we can do better. And so it'd be great to hear kind of what your thoughts were and how you founded Fractal and why.
Sure. So maybe it might be helpful to get started with a statement about what Fractal does. Our purpose is to develop innovative therapies that can defend humanity from the metabolic diseases of modernity. We think that fundamentally, metabolic disease is an inevitable consequence of the modern lifestyles that we're now leading, and the fact that our genetics are developed for the plains of the Serengeti, not the urban jungles of New York and Boston, where many of us now reside. And that mismatch between our genes and our environment is why we develop metabolic disease. And we feel like it's really necessary to figure out how we're going to fix the physiology in the body in order to defend ourselves from the risk of metabolic disease that we all face. So how did I get interested in this? I got interested in this because of a frustration. When I was a clinical cardiology fellow at the Brigham, I had a lot of patients with type 2 diabetes and coexisting cardiovascular disease. I also had a dad and an uncle who were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I became convinced that we've sort of reached the limit of the effectiveness of our traditional approaches to dealing with type 2 diabetes. We have like 50 or 60 approved drugs for type 2 diabetes, and yet the proportion of patients whose disease is under control is still less than 50%. In fact, even though we've doubled the number of approved therapies in the last 10 years, we've actually worsened our population level control of the disease. And I became convinced in seeing patients on a daily basis that we expect so much of their daily engagement in the management of their conditions that we've hit the asymptote of how much time and energy people can spend managing chronic disease. And when you integrate that across patients with multiple concurrent chronic diseases on a number of different medicines, what you get is we've hit an asymptote. People are on as many medicines as they can ever be on. The additional medicine that I might prescribe today means that they're going to stop taking a different medicine that you may have prescribed for them just last week. And so we're in the zero-sum game of what we're going to get patients to pay attention to on a daily basis. And that led me to think that we need to think about how we're going to reduce disease burden in society. We cannot think that we're going to use digital tools, even as available as they are, or medicines, and expect that we're going to turn major chronic diseases around. The only path out of this for society is to couple those things with therapies that actually fix what's broken rather than manage what is progressively worsening. And that sort of conviction led me to think about a need to start a company focused on trying to reverse type 2 diabetes rather than provide additional tools for managing it on top of all of those that already exist.
I think that framing is so important to what we talk about almost weekly, no, Jen? As we think about, we had been talking about hypertension previously, and just the story is so similar. How many medications we have, how much attention it takes as an individual, how much the environment actually contributes to that. And I think it's true for many chronic diseases. And we recognize that those people who have lower socioeconomic status, have multiple jobs and less time, right? If it's hard for people who are in kind of the top economic echelon to be able to create the time and space to manage chronic disease, we really are doing a disservice to those who need more. So then the cardiologist looked at the duodenum. Is that what happened next? How do we get there? Doctor?
Well, the nice thing about cardiology is that it selects for a certain level of fearlessness, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think the thing that the amazing thing about cardiovascular disease, right, is that we don't think about it, but it's not really a problem of the coronary artery or the vessel at all. It's a systemic cardiometabolic abnormality driven by excessive insulin and insulin resistance that happens to manifest in the coronary artery or in the arteries to the brain, leading to a stroke or leading to a heart attack. But that systemic problem is one that fundamentally begins in the gut. And the reason that we know that it begins in the gut is through a surprising set of observations that bariatric surgeons started to make about 15, 20 years ago, showing that if you bypass the duodenum surgically, you get an immediate improvement in blood sugar, in hunger, food choice, in insulin sensitivity, and in blood sugar levels. And so it's the problem that I framed earlier is we can't expect diet and lifestyle interventions or drugs to pull ourselves out of this problem on our own. The opportunity stemmed from the observations from bariatric surgery that somehow intervening in the gut can reverse metabolic disease, in fact, provide a metabolic reset that affects all aspects of metabolism, one massive component of which is cardiovascular risk. But type 2 diabetes is another important aspect of that. And so that's where the attention turned to the gut. And it makes sense that it should be the gut, because the duodenum is the first part of your body that knows for sure that you're about to absorb nutrients. It's not the mouth or the esophagus or the stomach, it's the duodenum. And the second that food hits the duodenum, the body's entire metabolic set point shifts from breaking down energy stored in order to make sure that there's always sugar around for your brain to storing away the sugar that you're absorbing and saving it for a rainy day. And what we discovered is that there's a dysfunctional signal coming from the duodenum in people who have a lifetime of high fat and high sugar diets. And this dysfunctional duodenal signal is fundamentally driving the insulin resistance epidemic, of which diabetes and cardiovascular disease are two manifestations.
So fantastic. So let's a few different areas that people are now starting to ask questions about. So I guess the first is, when we think about this, let's have you tell us a little bit about what Fractal actually does in the duodenum. So I think there are a couple of people asking kind of to first understand that. And then I think what we'll do is we can bring on Marc Elia as well to talk with us a little bit. But Fractal's concept of working in the duodenum is not limited to just thinking about diabetes. And I think a couple people have heard wind of this too. So just a little bit about the broader concept of what future directions may also be, in addition to talking about the diabetes. You know, it's interesting. You talked about evolution, and I would say probably over time, the duodenum may become a smaller part, right, of what the human body has or does in response to living in this kind of a stimulus. The problem is that race against time is going to take so long that you're saying if we really want to be around as a successful race, we need to speed that evolution up. And that's kind of what you're trying to do. And that's kind of exciting to hear. So let's start with Fractal and what it actually does, and then answer some questions about diabetes and non-diabetes.
Certainly. So our first product is Revita, which is an endoscopic catheter-based ablation of the duodenal mucosa, which triggers a natural healing response in the duodenum after ablation that regenerates a normal mucosa. And the reason that we settled on ablation is sort of two things. Number one, the pathology in the duodenum is characterized by an overgrowth or hyperplasia of the duodenal mucosa, which causes an accelerated absorption of nutrients. Like high fructose corn syrup is this high octane fuel that causes your lining of your duodenum to thicken and then accelerates the absorption of fat or sugars into your body at a rate that your body just can't handle. So by ablating and resetting the lining of the duodenum, our aim is to reverse that core structural and functional pathology at the duodenal surface. And why we do ablation is because if we're really going to get a handle on this problem, we need to think about how we're going to deliver millions of metabolic resets globally annually, right? Because the scale of the problem that we're talking about is 500 million people around the world with type 2 diabetes and maybe another 500 million with other metabolic diseases. So we're talking about a significant subset of the global population. And we have an infrastructure in endoscopy that can accommodate that level of volume. We, in fact, do 20 million endoscopies every year in the United States. About half of those are screening colonoscopies in the United States. Half of them are upper endoscopies. Almost everybody above the age of 45 or 50 has a gastroenterologist that they go to. In fact, there will be 3 million people with type 2 diabetes who are going to get an endoscopy this year. So the question is, how do we develop a technique to try to reverse the pathology of the duodenum that can be a bolt-on into the existing endoscopy infrastructure in order to be able to change the trajectory of metabolic disease at scale? And that's what the Revita system endeavors to do.
Fantastic. So for those who don't know, by the way, Dr. Rajagopalan. Oh, you have comments. But let me just tell you first.
Okay.
I know that was like, what was the signaling? And now I get it. Dr. Rajagopalan's wife, nationally renowned endoscopist, gastroenterologist, by the way. So he has a good sounding board right there for endoscopy and can spew out those numbers for a good reason. I will correct what I was saying earlier. It's not less duodenum. It's healthier duodenum long-term. One of the questions I will ask later after I let Jen ask audience questions is how long before we eat those little brownies that come out of a box with high fructose corn syrup and the duodenum gets hyperplasia again after you do the procedure?
Great question. It's the first question I always get. It seems to take years to develop the hyperplasia of the duodenum. This is not something that happens overnight. In model organisms, like in little mice, you feed them a high-fat diet, like it happens over a couple of months. If you do it to a larger animal, it happens over many, many months. And in a human, it seems to take years. But many people then ask, well, does this just mean that I can go back to eating a bad diet? And are we just enabling people's bad choices? And I would actually flip the point around. When I was a cardiology fellow, one of my patients underwent a bariatric surgery. And 3 days after the surgery, I visited him in the intensive care unit. He just had started to eat, and he had no appetite for high-fat, high-sugar foods anymore. Any of us who's seen a patient post-bariatric surgery knows that that person who had recalcitrant bad behavior and diet that we could not counsel them out of, no matter what type of coaching and nudging we would do, all of a sudden had no interest in the stuff that got them into that bad place. So one of the things that we find most exciting about our technology is that it's fundamentally reframes the question of the chicken or the egg in terms of the relationship between bad diets and pathology. And I would argue that a significant fraction of the behavior is actually driven by the gut pathology rather than the other way around. So if you can fix the gut pathology, then the behavior actually gets better. And in our clinical studies, we see what you see from bariatric surgery, which is a shift towards a lower weight without actually asking people to change consciously their behavior on a day-to-day basis. And that feels like an incredibly important way for us to try to get past the metabolic epidemic as a society. And one of the things I sort of say to people is like, we got to fix this problem now because our genes are not going to evolve rapidly. And there's no point in going to Mars if we have to build an insulin manufacturing plant to take care of our diabetes while we're there. So we got to figure out how we're going to be healthier for any of the other stuff that we want to do with optimism to make any sense.
I love the pathology driving behavior. Now our VR friends who are quickly working on behavior are looking at this going, wait, hold on. But let's do the comments first, Jennifer, and then let's bring on Marc, and then we'll continue talking because I see Marc nodding in the background as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of I kind of feel like my duodenum should be ablated now. I've been working on my hyperplasia for a good 20 and 30 years.
I kind of feel like we need to take the vending machines out of schools, but I felt that way a long time. So we're changing what's in them, but we can talk about that.
It's cake. I love cake. So we have Dr. Kirsten Board, who is tuning in from Colorado. Dr. Board, good to see you again. She's an internal medicine physician. So thank you for tuning in. It does appear that, I don't know, there's some integration issue. So Dr. Ranki Komolafe is tuning in. She's chair and CEO. She is in Scottsdale, Arizona. So thanks for tuning in. And sorry, I am going back and forth here. We have Brenna Donlin, clinical nurse manager and member advocate, tuning in from Barcelona. And Dr. Komolafe has asked, is this recorded for replay? Yes, we are. Sorry, let me just pull that up. We are recorded for replay. So you can watch us on YouTube. You can watch us on Vanguard.Health /MedTech Insights, which is down on the bottom. And we do have a student of Ami's who is supposed to be working on loading these onto Spotify and the like. And we do have one particular question for Dr. Harith from Dr. Ronke Komolafe, who said, I like your integrated approach to treating the underlying issues and symptoms simultaneously. How responsive are patients and payers to this approach?
Great question. Let's talk about patients and payers respectively. Patients who have coronary disease can be treated with medicines, and they can be treated with stenting procedures, and they can be treated with surgery. And one of the things that we found in cardiology is that patients really, really like to feel like the problem that's driving the pathology is being fixed. They're totally happy to take medicines, but they also feel like a desperate desire to bring the pathology under control. So once patients understand that there's something going on in their gut, which they've suspected all along, and their physicians haven't really been that attuned to because we haven't had an intellectual framework to understand what's actually happening, patients are like, well, let's fix this, and let's also take the medicines to try to prevent it from coming back. And let's also do the diet and lifestyle intervention. So in my point of view, there's sort of three pillars to metabolic care: diet and lifestyle, critical; metabolically favorable pharmacotherapy, critical; but then a metabolic physiologic reset, also critical. And all three of those things go together. I think patients see that. Payers need something that's going to change the trajectory of disease. There is nothing, in their words today, that is fundamentally changing the fact that there's going to be 50 million type 2 diabetics in the United States by 2035. And we're going to be spending $1 trillion on type 2 diabetes, mostly for our failure by 2035. And so what payers are asking for is therapies that are scalable and disease modifying. And we hear that loud and clear from payers. We think that we have something that could potentially be very attractive.
That's wonderful. So, payers importantly, but also building out the platform, building out trials, being able to get this into the community is important. And we can't do that without people who invest in us and our ideas. So this might be a good time to bring on Marc Elia. So Marc Elia founded Novelis Therapeutics with others, and then M28 Capital Management. He's on the board of Adimab, SQZ Biotechnologies, Fractal Laboratories, and Adagio Therapeutics. In the past, he was a partner at Bridger Capital and an analyst at Bridger Management before that. So let's bring Marc on to join us as well.
Did not know he was on the board of SQZ. They pronounce it squeeze.
Oh, they pronounce it squeeze. That's fantastic. I love it. I love it.
They really do pronounce it squeeze. Welcome.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I was going to let it go, just so you know. I was going to be gentlemanly about the whole thing.
Marc, it is so good. That's right. It is so good to have you with us. Will you do us a favor and talk to us a little bit about M28 Capital Management, kind of what you do and what you invest in? Because I see we have some entrepreneurs who are interested in hearing, what your interests have been. And then maybe tell us a little bit about what attracted you to Fractal, and in that way be able to tell some of our entrepreneur audience what you look for in the people that you're investing in.
Sure, happy to do it. So M28 is actually a long-short public equity hedge fund by and large, right? Which means we buy and sell stocks most days. I happen to do that generally around biopharmaceuticals, with some medical technology in it as well. But look, by and large, when your job is to try to compound capital in the life sciences, one wants to see really provocative avenues towards high impact interventions, right? That deliver meaningful value to society and which can be underwritten prospectively with some very interesting, hopefully unrecognized or controversial elements, right? That's sort of those asymmetries, I suppose, are the mother of compounding power. So, what I try to do is look for meaningful solutions to big problems. I think the good news for entrepreneurs around healthcare and the life sciences is there's a zillion ways to do it. There's a lot of capital. I think in the intro you talked about sort of investing in and around COVID. One of the defining features of the pandemic has been a huge amount of liquidity. So if you have something provocative and interesting, it's a pretty good time to bring it to market because there's a lot of money, and there's only so many, like movie theater and retail chain stocks to trade around all day. As it goes to Fractal, I mean, it's a story I hope that will end up being highly emblematic of the sorts of things I'm interested in that obviously Harith is brilliant, and it's just nice to put capital to work behind a great mind and let him do all the hard work, and then I sit back and try to look smart at the end. But in the more practical sort of sense, I think what is particularly important here is that number one, Fractal's aimed at just a massive, obvious consequence, right? This is one of the hallmark morbidities and sources of mortality for the human species. And so wonderful always to start with sort of an important end in mind. Now, for me, actually, some of the seeds of this investment were born out of conversations years ago with a fellow probably most of you are aware of named Steve Nissen, who is a, provocative and eloquent advocate of the cardiometabolic benefits of bariatric surgery. And I was sort of had that in the back of my mind when through a fellow investor, I was introduced to Harith and Fractal, and it stuck with me, right? Here is this procedure that's sort of anatomically violent that I think began with one proposed benefit in mind and ends up driving a whole series of somewhat unexpected benefits of unexpected magnitude. And some of the things that Harith is prosecuting with Fractal aim at those same potential benefits in a much more scalable, patient and system-friendly sort of form factor. So that was interesting from the start. And I think it leads to some of the conviction a lot of us have in the value and the probability set for Revita and some of the other things going on Fractal. Second thing I would say is that as a biopharmaceutical investor, there's a lot of stuff going on in my world that is deeply intellectually provocative. I'm thinking, for example, of genome editing, right? So there are certain monogenetic diseases that I'm sure their lawyers don't let them say can be cured by. But when we're talking about, something like transthyretin amyloidosis, and you are simply restoring wild type, you are treading right on that ground of, okay, well, this is not a problem anymore if it can be fixed. So, in metabolics, at least as my, let's say, lay investing mind can grasp it, we don't get a singular hallmark molecular target, right? There's a whole host of circuitry and a whole host of sort of competing, self-limiting, self-reinforcing systems at work. So it sort of made some sense, to me at least, that if editing was going to go on, it was probably going to occur at the more anatomic organ level, which is really what Harith is proposing, right? If you look underneath, the literature, it's a hypothesis whereby ameliorating an organ-specific disease drives an organism-level benefit sense that has these sort of, forgetting about the data, which are already provocative and really impressive in the sort of acute space. It's sort of, for lack of a better phrase, teleologically beautiful, if you can think such a thing, right? That there is this presumptive avenue that's available to all of us. And I think, Jennifer, as you said, I also think, okay, well, my duodenum's probably pretty good and overgrown. When I see something that makes me think I would enjoy availing myself of these benefits, that's usually a pretty good place to start thinking about putting capital to work. So that's sort of the whole background in a nutshell.
Mark, that's fantastic. We have a couple comments that are coming in over here. So one is teleologically beautiful should be our catchphrase for today.
I love that.
So I really like that. That's great.
That's so dorky. That's like very Boston dorky.
It is. It's a Boston commentator who's saying it, but that's great. I think the second concept that people are asking about, which is interesting, is just the investing part. People are curious, and if you're comfortable, which because it's publicly available, Harith talking a little bit about where you are in the stages. We've had a lot of early stage people on the show. You are later in that So kind of where you are and where you go next. I think people are very interested in kind of what happens at this juncture.
Changing the practice of medicine is expensive, and there is no doubt that that these major structural realignment is needed. On the other hand, the opportunity is characterized by the fact, by some of the numbers that I threw out earlier. We're talking about $1 trillion industry over the next 10 years. So changing the structure of how we deliver care to 30 million people in the United States, 500 million people around the world is not something that's going to happen super easily. Mm-hmm. So we've raised about almost $300 million of capital so far, which is, how do you know if something is a lot or a little? I just think that the fact is, like, you do what is needed in order to be able to achieve the impact that you want to have. The fundamental point about large market opportunities is you don't need to capture a huge chunk of it in order to have a really huge opportunity. And doing something small is just as hard as doing something really big. Mm-hmm. So when given the choice between aiming low or aiming high, I think that the bias should always be towards the much more aggressive, much more hopefully optimistic vision for what kind of world you think you can try to create, and then to accumulate whatever capital you need as efficiently as you possibly can to prosecute that opportunity as effectively as is necessary to achieve the broadest possible definition of what you think impact means for what you have. And so we have laid out sort of a vision for Fractal for the next 10 to 15 years as an organ editing metabolic therapeutics company. And we have a view that, a first principles point of view, that type 2 diabetes is at its core two problems. Problem number one is insulin resistance, which until recently we had very little ability to wrap our head around, but now we know ties to duodenal dysfunction. And then problem number two is insulin production. Because of insulin resistance, the pancreas stops making insulin. If we can develop single course therapies that fix both insulin resistance and insulin production, then we can eradicate type 2 diabetes. And so we're on a mission to do just that. And so sort of our 2035 goal is to have approved and accessible therapies that can eradicate type 2 diabetes. And that's, a large enough of a problem for a person like Marc to get excited about.
That's fantastic.
I'd like to think.
I think he would agree, as he, nods vigorously to these things. But so two little questions coming in, and we should start to wrap up as we're on the half hour. So, one is just a quick reminder by some of the other investors that we've had, right, that this is that same message. Have your overarching goal, be able to deliver your message as Dr. Rajagopalan is able to do. But for every raise, be very clear on how efficiently and quickly you can raise what you need for the next step. And that next step is sometimes small, but very important. And so just again, to all our entrepreneurs who are writing in right now. As we look forward, there has been some talk of Fractal also thinking about other things in the duodenum. Is that something that you are comfortable sharing about, just other diseases that might be along the way in the pipeline?
Well, we think of ourselves as having privileged access to the duodenum, to the pancreas, to the liver, to the stomach. And we think that there are a lot of diseases in there that are really, really, that have huge unmet need. So there's nothing that I'm able to reveal publicly, but we are very, very keen to leverage our privileged access to those organs to deliver definitive therapies for the diseases that emanate from those areas, and we're excited about what the future holds in that regard.
Fantastic. And we have one or two advocacy groups asking whether you are interested in rare diseases at all when you're attacking those organs, as there are a few that are centered on them.
We are, I would say that we are squarely focused on metabolics right now, but we think that we can definitely think about where we go from there once we're ensconced well in type 2 diabetes.
Wonderful. I think it's probably time for last words. As a reminder, all four of us on this show are representing ourselves, and not necessarily, although Fractal and Harith sounds fair, but the companies for which we work or with whom we affiliate. And with that in mind, maybe Marc will give you a few closing words and thoughts for our audience, and then Harith, over to you.
Well, I guess all I would say is thank you so much for having me, and I'm certainly glad that Harith is getting this among many other chances to really put a vision in front of the clinical community and hopefully soon the patient community, because I think what he's doing, what they are doing at Fractal, is different and important. And there's a lot of pharmaceutical pharmacologic innovation, but it looks pretty incremental by comparison. And so I will be looking forward to having Ravita and Fractal get the attention I think we all think it may well deserve. So it's going to be a fun ride, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Harith, over to you.
Well, the last thing I'll say is that that you need people who can serve as booster rockets on your journey along the way if you're an entrepreneur. And I think some of the most compelling versions of that are investors who have the ability not only to deploy capital, but to deploy intellectual firmament to what you're doing, but then also to help catalyze even more expansive and clear thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and how. And I've been privileged to be able to work with Marc now and to get to know him over the course of almost a year. And he's been an awesome intellectual thought partner as well as a capital partner. And that's what you want. You want, the intellectual thought partnership. Capital partnership is relatively easy to find. Intellectual thought partnership is really hard. And I would say that's what you need to be looking for in your best investors.
Is this like a bromance that we've stumbled upon?
We love it. Well, this was just fantastic. 35 minutes went by incredibly fast, but Dr. Rajagopalan and Marc, really a pleasure to have you, honored to have you on the show and to see all the work that you have done. And Harith, for you, especially for how long you have worked at it and in the face of people, not completely recognizing where the future could be and how quickly we can take steps in the right direction if we really put our focus there. So excited to see what happens with the company. Marc, thank you for having faith in people who say, we can do this, we can do it big, but it's going to take some capital and it's going to take some partnership. Without people like you, I don't think a lot of us would be able to do that. Dr. Joe, over to you for last words and just mirroring what Harith and Marc said. Really exciting to have an intellectually captivating partner. So as always, we took a week off last week, Jen, and I missed it. I miss being able to have these conversations with you. So with that, Jennifer, last words to you.
Started having unilateral conversations with myself. Really appreciate having Fractal Health on the show, M28 Capital. Ami and I are striving to bring in biotech and really disruptive biotech to you and our audience so that physicians, clinicians, healthcare providers can start to think about healthcare in a slightly different way, really understand what's on their horizon. And one of the things that I've learned is we're doing things we've never done before. So I think, Marc, you alluded to that. We've had some really brilliant technological scientific advances and we're curing things that have been uncurable. So big congratulations to Harith for doing it, for Marc for being behind it. Thank you to our audience for watching as you guys do every week and sharing your insights, questions, and we really appreciate that. So thank you to everyone. And this is the end. We'll see you next Tuesday at 12 noon. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.